I think we have quite a few disagreements, and I won't go into all the details of every one of the things you said. I want to disagree on the main thing you said, because I'm optimistic, and that's a very big disagreement. And I'm optimistic, first of all, because I learned from my grandfather that the only way a Jew can live is by being optimistic. So maybe I'm wrong, but I prefer to be wrong and live optimistic than being pessimistic and being right. And it's better to choose, I think, that way of living. Now, there are a few things that I have to also correct, if I may, even because there are very specific things that you said that a few of them are like wrong. Sorry, I'm saying it. The way you mentioned Hamas. You mentioned Hamas taking the word not accepting the democratic process in Palestine. There was a Palestinian one government with Fatah and Hamas together until Hamas decided to kick Fatah out and kill the people of Fatah in Gaza, taking over violently. It wasn't there was a democratic election 2 years prior to that. The blockade starts after Hamas takes violently over Gaza, not after the election when the world disagreed or not. The blockade starts after Gaza was taken over by Hamas, and that's a very big difference, because none of us here, it's very easy to sit here and explain how things should be better in Israel and how Israel can do things better and Palestinians do things better. It's much more difficult when you need to work with these group of neighbors that constantly. I grew up in Jerusalem, having buses in my city blown with terror, and knowing that you have a responsibility, that you as a state, as the government, have a responsibility to your civilians. You have to protect. That's your goal, to protect. What do you do? What do you do? And this is constantly. So this is something, and I'm not saying that Israel's choices are the best choices. I have lots of criticism to many of the choices Israel did through the years. But it's very easy to say it when you don't have the responsibility for your civilians' lives. It's much more complicated when you need to protect your people. How do you do that? And we have to give, when we criticize, we also have to give a valid option to do that. That is extremely important. Now, another thing is the historical thing that I also need to add from my perspective. As I said, I grew up in Jerusalem. I didn't grow up in a colony. Israel and the Zionist movement was never a colony movement, because we have no Great Britain or France or Denmark or Holland or Germany behind us. This was our place. No other. We don't belong to somewhere else where we need to send the money that we earn. Like it's a different story. So saying this group of Jews decide to do a colony just like Britain did a colony. No, they tried to find a safe haven for them because no one wanted them. It took a very long time until Herzl came to the conclusion that the Jews have to have their own state, that there's no other option. And that was not in the wake of colonialism. It was in the wake of the whole national movement of the 1800s, where people wanted to have their own states. This was the essence of the built Zionist movement, not the movement of colonialism, how we can exploit other places. And that's also why the Zionist movement was open to other options. The Zionist movement, the Zionist Congress, I don't remember the year, voted on the option to go to Uganda, because the British said, maybe you can do something there. And they said, we have to have something. The area where the land of Israel is under the Ottoman Empire. And even though they really tried, they didn't want us there. And the Ottoman Empire made a resolution saying Jews are not allowed to buy land in this area. So they tried to find a different solution. The other solution came with the British mandate that started after the First World War. And the mandate the British got to the country was to build a Jewish state there. That was the mandate that the British got from the League of Nations. The international world, it didn't start in 48. When the British got the control of the area, it was for the sake of building a Jewish state. That was their mandate by the League of Nations. So that was a legally international direction. It's very important to put it in the right context. This wasn't something a group of people did against everyone else. This was the League of Nations decision, what comes before the UN. And the Jews, at the same time, as the Jews were more and more in the country, the same thing happened to the Arabs too. They didn't call themselves Palestinian yet. The word Palestinian comes only later. And the Arab population became actually much bigger with the Zionist movement, because Arabs from the countries around found out that the Jewish movement here brought prosperity to the area. So people from Lebanon and from North Africa and from the whole area moved to this area because of the economical prosperity that the Zionist movement brought with it to the land. So in that sense, I would say that the Palestinian rise is equivalent to the Jewish rise. There was no Palestinian movement before the British came to create our own country. It wasn't a thing. There was not such a thing. I even remember I read once there was a committee, the Phil Committee. It came to the area in 1936, if I remember correctly. And an Arab representative came and witnessed, and he was asked about it, and he said, you have to stop using this word Palestinian. Palestinian, it's a Zionist finding. They came up with the name. We're Arabs of southern Syria. We are not Palestinians. This is what he says in the Testament. So the word, it's much more complicated than having a group of people, the Jews came, took the land. It's not like that. It's much more complicated, the whole story. Why am I optimistic? This is, I think, the main thing that we need to go toward. Through history, the young history of Israel, there were quite a few attempts to solve it. I grew up in Jerusalem in the years that everyone believed that peace is possible. And a two-state solution is just around the corner. There was a big majority among Palestinians and Israelis who supported a two-state solution. If you ask today, there's a much, much smaller support to that solution. But not because they're against this solution, it's because each side said that the other side doesn't want it. The tragedy that we are standing right now is a tragedy that since the year 2000, since Ehud Barak and Yasser Arafat met in Camp David, and it exploded, there's a parallel narrative existing, one among Israelis and the other among Palestinians. The Israelis, the majority, now I say Israelis, it's not all of them, but the very big majority, since Camp David and all the terror attacks and the Second Intifada and all what happened since, they insist on that the Palestinians don't want a two-state solution, that it's all a matter of time, and their final goal is to wipe us all, and that's why we can't give up anything. We have no partner in the other side. This is a story that the Israelis tell themselves. And they have many arguments to prove it. Their arguments are, we did the Oslo Accord, we gave them land for the first time in the history of the area. The local population got their own land. No one before gave the local, not since Israel, this area of the land of Israel, of Palestine, wasn't a sovereign state since Judea. 2,000 years. It was never a sovereign, it always belonged to some kind of an empire. Rome, Byzantium, the Mongols, Ottoman Empire, everyone, but never a sovereign state. So the first one to give the Palestinian state some kind of start towards a state was the state of Israel in 93. And even though we did that, the Israeli story, they continued to do terror. Yasser Arafat was a leader, and at the same time he was planning terror attacks and smuggling a weapon and bombs into the West Bank. So how can we trust the other side? This is the Israeli story. They proved they don't want peace. At the same time, the Palestinians have exactly the same story. They say, we gave up almost all the territory. Even though it all should belong to us, we said it's fine only with the 67 borders. We gave up so much. And even though the Israelis continued to build settlements that show that they don't really mean that they want peace. And I would argue that the problem is that both sides are right. Not that both sides are wrong. The problem is that both sides are right. Because they see their angle of the story and can't see the others. And that is the tragedy. At the same time, in the last 20 years, every side can have some argument that show that he's wrong, but we are blind for them. In the Israeli side, most Israelis ignore completely the fact that the Palestinian authorities did a complete secure cooperation with the state of Israel, protecting Israel from terror attacks the last 20 years from the West Bank. So the Palestinians proved that there is a partner that you can trust. But Israelis are so occupied on the thing that proves the opposite that they forget that. And in the Palestinian side, they forget that after the disengagement from Gaza, Israel decided actively to take more than 10,000 settlers out of their homes. So the settlements are not something an obstacle that will prevent peace. If it is an obstacle, Israel proved that they can move it if it's necessary. And they did that not only from Gaza, but also from the northern part of Samaria. Both sides ignore the fact that don't support their narrative. Both sides have very good arguments why the other side is wrong and bad. That's the tragedy. Why am I optimistic? Because we talk today with people that share the same values. When we look on the demonstration that happened here in the streets of Copenhagen, both pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian, they both had the same argument. Look on the atrocities that the other side did. They're willing to kill civilians, children, elderly. Both sides say the same thing, but on the other side. Which means that they have a shared value. If both sides agree that the worst thing is to hurt civilians, those who are not part of it, if both sides agree that this is the worst thing, then it means we have common values as the essence of who we are. If we had Nazis from the one side and humanists from the other side, then there's no way to come to an agreement. But if we have people who share the same values, then there is a goal for solution. When I lived in Jerusalem, I was part of a group of rabbis and imams who went to each other's, not only to talk to each other, but to each other's schools. And I was invited to a Palestinian Muslim school in East Jerusalem. And I remember the surprise I had when the girls asked me, how can it be that Judaism allows killing of civilians? And I was like, no, it's not allowed. How can it be that you say that? But when they asked me that, I suddenly understood that the imam that right now in the religious Jewish school in Israel is asked exactly the same question. And that was the thing that gave me hope. Because when we start seeing each other, understanding each other's narrative, then there's a chance and hope for peace. The good thing that happened since 7th of October is the understanding that we can't continue in the same way as we did before. This is a big understanding that happened in Israel. Israel is not in a crisis right now. It's the opposite. Hamas brought Israel together, reminded Israel of what is in stake. Hamas brought Israel together, and Israel in that sense is stronger than ever before. But Israel also understands today that they can't continue in the same path that they did the last 15, 20 years. Many Israelis thought that we can live with what once in a while Hamas will shoot some missiles and we will manage. The understanding is that we can't continue the same way. It can lead to very bad decisions, but hopefully, with the help of the world and of the good people of Israel and of Palestine, it can also lead to finally come to a solution. The biggest round of atrocities that we had led at some point to a great change. Yom Kippur War led to the peace with Egypt. We're the biggest enemy of Israel, biggest and strongest. After the first Intifada, that was terrible for Palestinians and for Israelis, came Oslo agreements. After the second Intifada, came the disagreement for Gaza. I hope that this war, that should end as quick as possible, with as few casualties as possible. Well, who can say that anymore? It's terrible, the situation. But that can lead, in the near future, year, 2 years, 5 years, we should give it time. Don't expect solutions now. But it can lead to a better place. I'm a strong believer of that. And the key, in my view, is the religion. The source to a solution is the religion. Because it is a conflict that is such a huge religious element in it, both from the Jewish side and the Palestinian side, that the people that I believe are also partners of mine, and my father worked for the Religious Peace Initiative in the Middle East, together with people, even people that are members of Hamas, not those who are the militant side, but and I really believe that a peace process that will take religion as a source of the solution will become a good peace. So there is hope for the future. There's much more to say about it, but I only had 15 minutes and I took 20.
Thank you very much, both of you. And I really feel that I should leave the microphone to you now, Colin, because I'm sure you have a lot to say in reply. Time is up. So what to do? 10 more minutes. Yeah, we have Birte's blessing, so 10 more minutes from now. I also have a question. Can I give you the microphone for 3 minutes? And then, okay, here you go, Colin. You have a microphone already.
Can I respond to?
Yes, please.
Yes.
Briefly.
Thank you so much. On the question of Hamas and its takeover of Gaza, my understanding is that Hamas won the election. America and the EU wanted Fatah to take over from Hamas because they did not like Hamas. So Fatah was trying to take over from Hamas with the support of the United States. And because the United States was trying to help Fatah to let Fatah take over, Hamas stopped it and stepped in and kicked out Fatah. And you're absolutely right that the blockade began after that. But the root of the problem, I think, was that Fatah was trying to take over power with the help of the United States. May I ask you about the occupation? Do you accept that most of the world, I don't know what the Danish government says, does the Danish government believe that the occupation is illegal in international law? On the question of the colonial movement, let me just go back to my point earlier. Imagine the front row of 5. You are the Jewish population in Palestine in 1880. The rest of you can see that these people want to bring in Jews from Europe until they become the majority and create a Jewish state. How are you going to feel when you can see what this Jewish community is trying to do? On the question of the Balfour Declaration, it said, yes, they support the national movement, provided it does not harm the interests of the non-Jewish. It didn't even call them Arabs or Palestinians, it just said the non-Arabs, provided it doesn't hurt the interests of the rest of the community. I would say that the Palestinians, even in the 19th century, they realized that they were different from the other Arabs. But Palestinian nationalism developed partly as a response to Zionism. It seems to me that you can only be optimistic if you believe that what we're going to see is a continuation of the present occupation. And what many people are afraid of is that when the fighting in Gaza finishes, Israel will occupy Gaza and do the same thing to Gaza that it has done in the West Bank. But I really would love to hear what you think about the occupation.
No way. 2 minutes. In 1967, one of the greatest religious and scholars of Israel, both religious and secular scholars of Israel, Yeshayahu Leibovich, he warned the state of Israel of not creating a Palestinian state. Of not creating a Palestinian state. Right. He said, holding the territories will mean something terrible for the future. And I couldn't agree more. I wasn't there at the time, I wasn't born, so I couldn't do a lot. But definitely the situation of holding occupied territories without giving equal rights is unbearable, unthinkable, and unaccepted in my view. Now, saying that, we have to remember that in Israel, today, that 20% of Israelis are Arabs. Most of them define themselves Palestinians that have equal rights, 100% equal rights. Not exactly no difference between me and them. It's 20% of the population. So when we use terms from other places, apartheid or colonialism, and that's the wrong thing we do, that we try to, because the situation is more complicated. Occupation is the main problem. And we have to remember that many Palestinians, when they say occupation, they don't mean what you mean. Because you say occupation is 67. Many Palestinians say occupation is 48. So the whole state of Israel can't exist. And with that, it's very hard to, if in their views Israel shouldn't exist, then it's very hard to come to a solution that gives place to both of them. And I believe that the challenges, first of all, the solutions to create a two-state solution are much easier than we say. The border already exists. As you said, the wall was already built. It's more or less, it's on the 67 lines, more or less. I know the line perfectly, so I believe me. And there are already agreements from the 90s about, because most of the settlements are in areas that's not a problem at all. I lived in a settlement because my neighborhood of Jerusalem is right after the Green Line. So it's considered a settlement, but it's a part of Jerusalem. No one thinks that should be in the future part of the Palestinian state, not one. Many of Jerusalem neighborhoods, Pisgat Ze'ev, Gilo, Ramot, it's not an issue. The issue with settlements, talk about more or less 100,000 settlements that are in problematic geographical areas. And for these, I have two solutions. The one, as they did in other places, withdrawing from there and move them from there. The other is, let them stay. Israel has 20% of the population who are Palestinians. Palestine is allowed to have Jewish citizens too. It shouldn't be a Palestinian state and a state for all citizens. If we have two-state solution, Jews should be allowed to live in the Palestinian state too. So there is a solution. What should happen with these 100,000 settlers? But it's not 700,000. Most of those live just next to the borders. So it's not an issue how to give them more geographical area in the south or in the north instead. So that's already, there were agreements. That's not an issue. The question is they're willing to solve it, not how. How is already in place. Will we find the people to do it? That's a big question, and I have to be optimistic as a religious and a believer person.
So the last question, I think, for today is, you mentioned, Jair, that you are hopeful or you are optimistic because of shared values. Or kind of we agree on the rules, as it were, that don't attack civilians, etc. Now, and you also say that religion has to be part of it. Does that include the extremist? I mean, on both sides. You mentioned, Colin, that in the process of Ireland, taking the extremists into the process was part of the solution. Does that also apply to Israel, and how's that going to be?
First of all, people are not born extremists. So the extremist is not necessarily the place they will have always been and will always be. In many ways, the religious segments in the extremists that exist today were pushed to that because of the Oslo Agreement. The Oslo Agreement was a secular solution by the liberal forces in this part and in that part that pushed religion and said, religion is the sources of problems, we should push them outside because they will give all the problems. And surprisingly, that's what's happened. They gave all the problems. The religious side in Israel is very, very extreme right-wing. This is where I grew up. So I know many of where I grew up hold very extremist views. And the same thing happened to the Palestinians. While historically, it's not always have to be like that. In 1967, the only party in the Israeli parliament who voted against annexing Jerusalem was the religious party, the religious national party. that today is seen as the most right-wing extremist, they were the only one to vote against in the government. Because religion has this, and the same thing, by the way, with Hamas. When Hamas started, it was seen as a moderate power against these extremists from Fatah. Many Israelis were happy with religious forces, because religious forces has the tendency to be mediators, to understand we have to protect lives. So we have to compromise. This is part of religion. This is part of Islam, part of Judaism, and part of Christianity. In that sense, the religion doesn't have to stay where it is right now. But I can tell you that right now in Doha, my father sent a delegation of rabbis from some settlements, together with imams who are leaders of the Islamic movement in Israel. And they are together in Doha to negotiate with Hamas on solutions. And that happens right now. So definitely there is hope, and I can see it happen. It's not destined to happen. We have to make it happen.